So I will be talking about urban permaculture and my experience from Poland. Can we switch to the next slide? Okay, I would like to dedicate my presentation to Bill Mollison, the founder of Permaculture. I'm positive that he's watching us right now, so yeah, let's honor his work and invention of permaculture. Next slide, please. So this is us from space. The light dots that you can see on the picture, these are our cities. We live in them, we concentrate our work, we need to power the cities, we need to feed the people that live in the cities, and this all needs some energy, materials, food, water, and it's right now at the moment it is powered mostly by fossil fuels, which is not sustainable. So there is a need to change the paradigm of how we live in the cities and how we imagine that the cities of the future will look like. Next slide, please. When I was a young kid, I was interested in, you know, sci-fi. I read a lot of books about space traveling, like Arthur C. Clarke or Polish author Lem. And I imagined that in the near future we will be living in, you know, self-sustaining homes on another planets and so on. And one day I thought, why don't we live this way on the face of the planet Earth? So how to, you know, design our homes, how to design our cities that they will be powered by solar energy. They will produce all the food that we need, purify water and air, and will enable us to recycle all the waste materials. So this is the paradigm. This is the idea of what our cities should look like in the nearest future, because, you know, as you probably heard, there is not enough time to do the shift to combat climate change. Next slide, please. I got into permaculture in the very early stage of my life. First, when I heard about permaculture, I was about 13 years old. This picture that you can see right now, it's me when I was 17 years old. I designed a living machine to purify water and to use the byproducts to produce food. You can see it on the next slide. This was the gateway for me to get to technical university. I joined a contest and received a major award for this project and got into technical university. And after only 6 months, next slide, please, I got stuck. No one was interested in supporting me in my research about living machines. I didn't get any support from the technical university and any professors. So I quit, and then I moved to university, to the faculty of ecohydrology and biosystemic ecology. And yeah, that was my major you know, background in science. So after I graduated and become a master of environment protection, ecohydrology, and biosystemic biotechnology, I thought about what to do next. So yeah, I started a small NGO to promote things like permaculture and ecological design. Next slide, please. I also started to experiment with living machines and hydroponics on my balcony. I didn't have any access to a garden, a piece of land, and so on. So I started to put everything I could in a small scale on my balcony in the city space. And next slide, please. So this was my first experiments with cultivating of plants using water and purifying this water along the way. At this slide, you can see a water chestnut, an edible plant, right next to this beautiful flower. Next slide, please. This was the first trial for me to build a self-sustaining ecosystem that will purify water, that will produce oxygen, and a lot of food for us. Next slide, please. Yeah, here you can see hydroponically grown mulberry tree. I guess we have a small delay. And oh yeah, you can see it now. This mulberry tree gave me a lot of fruit, and it was only supported by a tank of water that contained nutrients. And this is all you need to cultivate your food within the city structure. Next slide, please. I was also able to cultivate mushrooms. These you probably know from Asian cuisine. This is moon fungus. It's edible, very nutritious, and it can be easily grown on pieces of wood. Next slide. So that was my background in permaculture at small scale. After that, I found a beautiful forest garden on a piece of a plot that hasn't been occupied and managed by man for more than 30 years. And I instantly got fascinated with it and went into studying the structure of this ecosystem, what kind of plants are growing there, and how much food it can produce. There was a lot of fruit trees, a lot of vines, a lot of mushrooms in the soil, and it was like jungle of living ecosystem that gave a lot of food. So I tried to mimicking the structure of it, and on other balconies I designed what you can see on the next slide. These are small microscopic forest gardens that you can put on your balcony, and they act the same as a natural forest garden and are easy to move and are easy to use for anyone that is living in the city. They produce a lot of food, a lot of herbs, a lot of green stuff to eat. Next slide. So you can create a small ecosystems, connect them, even use water ecosystem like this one on the next slide to purify rainwater and use this rainwater for irrigation of your balcony crops. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, I was interested in using living technologies, using wetland plants and other microscopic organisms to purify water. And I developed this living machine that you could use for treating your gray water. if you wash your hands with some soap that is best biodegradable, you can use the gray water that comes out of it to support plant communities. Next slide, please. So I created this installation that will use water over and over again and purify it so it is usable also for human needs. Next slide. Then with a group of friends, we started to create larger ecosystems within the city structures. On this slide, you can see a community garden, a community forest garden that we've created throughout the workshops that lasted only 3 days. And this small group of people did the whole part of establishing this garden. Next slide will show you the whole structure that we've created. We've got raised beds filled with annual and perennial plants that support one another. And we've got a small water feature that will support wildlife like frogs and lizards and a lot of dragonflies and so on. And we've designed this whole garden along the swale that will passively collect rainwater, so we don't have to irrigate our crops. This was created in Krakow, and we are in this site. We are surrounded by a huge piece of city filled with blocks and apartments, and there is a small green space that we've chosen to establish our community garden. And it was supporting a group of I don't know, 20 or 30 people, giving a lot of herbs, vegetables, and fruits. Next slide, please. We came up with the idea that we can create a garden that will provide us with a lot of nutritious and fresh vegetables. This is the team of TRANSFORMACJA Foundation that I've created with my friends. And this is our project that we called Urban Farm. It was situated near the city of Lodz in central Poland, at the outskirts of the city. And we were able to produce a lot of fresh vegetables. Next slide, please. All that you can see is produced with the use of organic compost. We've collected a lot of wood debris, leaves, straw, and other stuff from the surrounding places. And we've used earthworms to create a living, nutritious compost. And with that, we supported the growth of all that you can see at the picture. We also used an old greenhouse that could extend our production season, so that we could be much more sustainable than outdoors. All that produce from our farm was sold to participants of our CSA model, and we also supported with fresh food food cooperative based in Łódź. So for a couple of years we were testing how much can we produce through our market garden, and what kind of fresh vegetables are suitable for this kind of design. Next slide, please. We are able to produce lettuces, radishes, and prepare it for our customers who got all the vegetables within the short distance from our farm. So it was very low cost and high sustainability. Next slide, please. This is lettuce prepared for taking away. Next slide. After a few years, we couldn't afford to pay the rent for the land that we needed for supporting that farm. So we thought that it would be good to try to create a farm or a living structure that would be sustainable and self-sufficient within the city structure. So we developed this project called BIOshelter, and we got a huge piece of existing architecture and created an ecosystem within the existing structure of the city. Next slide will show you the beginning of our project. This is how it looked like before our intervention. The next slide, please. And this is what we've done with this structure within only a period of 3 months. Next slide, please. You can see that we've installed 3 very large water tanks. In the middle tank, there were 100 fish swimming in it, and the other tanks were used for water purification. So it was just like the previous living machines, but in a larger scale, and it proved to be very efficient in sustaining a closed water ecosystem. And it also functioned as a passive solar gain. It accumulated solar energy that came through our windows, and in the night it radiated the heat to support the microclimate within this space. Next slide, please. We were totally off the grid. So in the winter time, we needed kind of heating system that would provide us with a heat energy to survive through the winter. So we've developed this compost heating system, as you can see at the slide. We were using waste organic material, and in certain composition, it starts to give a lot of heat. So you can use that heat to support your environment. After that, you get a lot of compost. So next slide, please. Using that compost, we were able to produce a lot of vegetables. Next slide. Next slide. We are also able to cultivate mushrooms and very nice edible and medicinal mushrooms that you can see on the slide right now. Next slide, please. This is the whole structure after a few months of development. Next slide, please. We are also able to produce algae using the water from our fish tanks and use the algae to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Next slide, please. We are also engaged in different projects concerning about old varieties of apples. Together with our friends and volunteers, we planted a lot of apple trees, old varieties of apple trees within the city structure in the city of Lodz. Next slide, please. We organized our own planting material. Next slide. And conducted workshops around the theme of how to plant apples within the city structure. Next slide. These were our workshops in 2014. Next slide, please. And we did it with a small group of people. We were able to plant almost 500 apple trees within the city structures in parks and so on. Next slide. In 2015, we did the same project in Germany, in the city of Abteiberg. So with a larger group of people. Next slide, please. Now we are going to Warsaw, the capital city of Poland. This, what you can see, is the workshops of building a Adobe oven. Next slide, please. In Warsaw, we are supporting a small community garden within the structure of the city. Next slide, please. This is the footage from our workshops. We are building it on our own from the bottom up, using almost 100% natural materials. Next slide, please. So this clay oven became a central point of the garden. It enabled us to produce a lot of nice food and prepare our meals, for example, pizzas, baking bread, and cakes. Next slide. So all the vegetables from the garden are processed, within the garden structure and produce a very nice food. Next slide, please. So this is our small community. Next slide, please. We also do a lot of experiment on our balconies. This is also from Warsaw. This is the first step to establish a food balcony garden. Next slide, please. So you start with some containers with compost, vermicompost produced by earthworms. And after a couple of weeks, you got this huge bunch of fresh herbs, vegetables, salad mix, and tomatoes. Next slide, please. You can also plant a small shrubs like, for example, blueberries or Physalis peruviana, which is very nice fruit from Peru. It can also grow in colder climates. So why not to put it on your balcony? Next slide, please. As you know, water is a main topic of my interest. So this is another workshops that we conduct near the Vistula River, the main river of Poland. And we are trying to show that you can use simple, low-cost technologies, biotechnologies, to purify water from the river. Next slide, please. So this is how it looks like, the whole structure. It's placed in a small greenhouse and uses only solar energy. Next slide, please. We also work with the river itself, using floating islands that can produce a lot of food.
5 minutes left.
Next slide, please. And this is one of the gardens that are placed on the water. Next slide, please. Now we are living like, this double life. We spend a lot of time in the city of Warsaw, but at the same time we are creating our homestead about 100 kilometers from Warsaw in the outskirts, in the rural areas of Poland. Next slide, please. This is our geodesic greenhouse. we love geodesic structures, so we build a lot of these on our site. Next slide, please. This enables us to heat our younger plants and conduct workshops within the structures. We do a lot of workshops, courses, PDCs, and experiments with what can we do to create a lushful environment. Next slide, please. And the main idea of this place is to support two CSA models, one based in Łódź, in the city of Łódź, and the other based in the city of Warsaw. We've got about 10 hectares of land. And next slide, please. We are doing a lot of research also concerning water, as you can see on this picture. This is a river pump that I've designed to water our vegetable gardens. It uses only the energy of water, so it doesn't need any fuel or electricity. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we have a lot of participants. Next slide, please. Our homestead is called a Valley of the Mist, and this is a short clip that will show you why do we call it that way. And this is the last piece of my presentation, so please click on and play the video. A beautiful site near the river and a very lushful environment, supporting a lot of permaculture projects and courses. Next slide, please. Yes, so thanks for watching. Thanks for having me on your conference. My name is Łukasz Nowacki. Here is a list of contacts. If you want to contact me, please do. Thanks a lot. Now it's a time for questions, if you have any.
Тобто зараз у нас час для запитань. So thank you very much, Łukasz. We are a little bit over time, so I propose that we just have one or two questions. Is it fine with you?
Okay, yes, it is fine.
Чи маєте ви спонсорів для своїх громадських проєктів, чи залучаєте ви якісь фандрайзинг?
Do you have any sponsors for your community projects? Do you involve any fundraising, and how your activity is perceived in your society?
Well, we try to gain sponsors, and mostly we collaborate with other NGOs and art museums and small business projects. But mostly we support our projects like from the bottom, and these are all locally supported communities. So yeah, we mostly work with our own budgets, very small, very limited. But if you have a limited budget, it you know, makes you to be very creative about it. And yeah, this is the part of hard reality that you need to you know, deal with. Our projects, yeah, we have a lot of support from local communities, and it is very you know, nice that people like what we are doing, and that people share the knowledge that we are giving them through the workshops, and inspire others to create their own projects. So yeah, we have a lot of support from different communities. It's a little bit different when it's concerning our government. We don't have a lot of support from the government structures. So yeah, that is a problematic situation.